Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Van Maren Show on LifeSiteNews.com. My name is Jonathan Van Maren, and today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Ryszard Legutko, the Polish philosopher, politician, and a professor of philosophy in Krakow, specializing in ancient philosophy and political theory. Now, I've wanted to talk to Dr. Legutko for a long time. He's had a fascinating career. Those of you who follow along with this podcast will know that we recently talked to Rod Dreher of the American Conservative about his book, Live Not by Lies, where he discusses how Christians weathered communism behind the Iron Curtain. And Dr. Legutko actually also lived under communism for years. He was actually the editor of the Samizdat Quarterly Arca, and after the collapse of the communist regime, he co-founded the Center for Political Thought, which combines research, teaching, seminars, and conferences, and is also a publishing house. In 2005, he was elected to a seat in the Polish Senate, representing the Law and Justice Party, where he became deputy speaker, and in 2007, he was Poland's education minister. In 2007 to 2009, he was the Secretary of State in the Chancellery of President Lech Kaczyński. He is currently a member of the European Parliament, where he sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He is the head of the Polish Law and Justice delegation to the European Parliament and a co-chairman of the Conservatives and Reformist Parliamentary Group. He has written a phenomenal book called The Demon in Democracy, where he explains what he sees as the commonalities between communism and liberal democracy. And of course, he witnessed this transition up close and in a very personal way. So I'm thrilled that he agreed to come on this podcast and have this conversation with us. And this is that conversation. So the first question I wanted to ask you to really set the stage is, how would you describe growing up under communism for somebody who didn't?
Well, it's difficult for me to say, because my perspective is of a person who was born under the old regime, under the communist system. So that's the whole experience that I have as a child or as a young man. I always imagined that people of my age at that time, young people of my age, had access to the richness of information, who had very many opportunities, not only for career making, but for developing their interests. I was hoping that someday would come that I could read any book I want to read. I could watch any movie I want to watch. So I just imagine that young people, more or less of the same age, living behind the Iron Curtain or at the other side of the Iron Curtain, for them, life was just a chain of sublime pleasures. Well, later on, I discovered that's not quite the case, but that was the primary difference, at least the difference that I imagined to be living in a closed world, one stifling ideology, and living in a society with thousand flowers blossoming.
When you were growing up, were you very aware of the restrictions that communism placed on your everyday life?
Well, that was obvious. Even a very simple thing like going abroad. I mean, not going to the United States or Great Britain, but visiting other communist countries was it generated a lot of problems. You have to fill in many forms. You have to fight the bureaucracy. Yes, I mean, that was obvious. I mean, the existence of restrictions, that was the primary sensation that you have, right? The experience that you had. The world is closed, that is, there are restrictions, and you have to learn how to avoid those restrictions or how to fight them.
How did your family, how did your parents, who obviously experienced the Second World War, how did they describe communism to you? How did they raise you in this context?
Oh, that was very simple. My parents came from the territories which eastern territories of pre-war Poland, which we lost after the World War II, and they experienced both the German occupation and the Soviet occupation. So they knew communism firsthand before communism came to Poland. And for them, which somebody today might find it strange or even hard to believe, for them communism was a worse system, more diabolic than the German occupation. The German occupation was extremely brutal, but it was somehow predictable in its brutality, whereas the Soviet system was not predictable. The Germans wanted to destroy the enemies, kill them enemies, and the Soviets wanted to destroy the enemies, but also to humiliate them. So you have to, if you're a victim, not only you have to suffer, but you have to thank your oppressors for making your life miserable. You have to show gratitude to them. So the aim was to humiliate, to make you nothing, to make you lose your self-dignity. So that was pretty awful. I never had the slightest illusion about the communist system. From the very first days of my life. So never even flirted with the idea of joining the Communist Party or falling into hope that some kind of socialist with a human face will emerge one day. No, never, ever. So I was always against communism.
When did you begin to resist communism?
Well, that depends what you mean by resist. I mean, when I was a young boy, I did all sorts of pranks.
Well, let's start there.
Well, just writing anti-communist slogans on the blackboard at school when nobody saw us, and things like that. And when you were writing homework, occasionally I included some anti-communism statements. I got away with it, so it wasn't really it wasn't anything serious. But I like doing it because I had the feeling that it's something. The worst feeling one could have is that you don't do anything, you capitulate. I just wanted to pretend that I didn't capitulate, although I never believed at that time that the system would ever fall. I thought I would be living in the communist system until the end of my days. But at least I pretended, I pretended I want to make a difference.
And then when did your formal resistance begin?
Seriously, it started with the solidarity, or just before solidarity. That was late 1970s. That was the beginning of the samizdat, if we can use this Russian word, right? Kind of underground publication there were technical possibilities for us to do it. So I was involved in that as a writer or as somebody who was distributing the samizdat publications. But later in 1980s, I was involved in launching and in editing such a publication, and then it developed. I became a part of the what was then called the democratic opposition.
What sort of things did this underground newspaper you worked with cover? What did you write about? What stories did you publish?
There was a variety of things that we published, including fiction. You could read poetry or short stories, reviews, political analyses, but also political philosophy or political theory. I mean, it was a publication like several others at that time. It was a publication for intellectuals, that is for educated people or for people who, even if they didn't have the formal education, they were seriously and sincerely interested in ideas, in literature. And there were many people like that. It was not only university people, not only journalists, not only intellectuals, as we call them, but also workers, but also middle class people, teachers, and engineers. That was one of the, I would say, nice things, rather few nice things at the time, that the group of people interested in serious problems, in serious art and serious ideas was quite large.
What are your memories of the fall of communism in Poland?
Of course, I was thrilled. I mean, the process was quite long. It started, I would say, a year before the actual collapse of the regime. So you could see clearly. It was clear to everyone that the system was disintegrating, that the communists were more and more willing to compromise and to get into some sort of agreement with the solidarity people. And so we were watching it, and we were kind of involved too, but I was not in this negotiating group, so I do know it from the first hand. But we were worried that somehow our side would go soft at a certain moment, and they would withdraw, and they did it. At least I think they did what was possible at that time, and then there was a domino effect because you could see that the entire communist bloc was falling into pieces, right? One after another. So yes, these were happy moments in my life. Not as happy, then again, it's paradoxical, not as happy as the first solidarity, which ended dramatically because of the martial law. Because this first solidarity movement was something of an explosion. That is, you live in a drab, gloomy society, and then it changes overnight. I mean, it makes you really delighted. That's a unique experience. I never didn't have it before or after. But yes, when the system was falling, we were happy too. We just hoped that the process would continue. But then later, of course, things became somewhat different. But that's a different story.
How quickly did you start to identify commonalities between liberal democracy and communism?
Quite early, I would say. I mean, soon after the communist system fell, and I was watching what was happening in my country, but I could also see what was happening and how things were commented upon in Western Europe and elsewhere. And I discovered first, that was the first impulse, so to speak. I discovered that the former communists, whom we consider to be bad guys, and who were bad guys, no matter how you look at them, that those communists all of a sudden became good guys, and they became a part of the new system. They became legitimate co-authors and citizens in the new system. Whereas conservatives like myself, we were being pushed out of the circle of respectability. That is, the former communists were not only good guys, but they were also responsible, moderate, middle of the road, European, civilized. But we were troublemakers, reactionaries, irresponsible, probably some of us insane, and some clearly fascist. So, and not only ourselves, that is conservative intellectuals, but also the people and the groups that were instrumental in making the system fall. The Catholic Church. Without the Catholic Church, we would not have survived as a nation. And then again, overnight, the Catholic Church became the enemy. And well, I said to myself, there must be something wrong, because the former communists who ruled the country now are ruling the country again, whereas those of us, or some of us, who oppose the rule do not have access to the decision-making processes, and we are being pushed out and marginalized. So I said to myself, well, it's no incident that things like these are happening. There might be some affinity, some deeper closeness between the liberals on the one hand and the communists or reform communists on the other. The Soviet Union was never really condemned universally. Yes, they say, I mean, the mainstream people in Western Europe, but also here in Poland after the fall of communism. Yes, the Soviet Union had its brutal moments, but on the whole, you know, you have to look at it from different perspectives. You have to have a more balanced opinion on that. After all, it was a powerful modernizing force. It did a lot of good things too, and so on. And then I thought, well, maybe it is this modernization that makes communism so attractive, and that makes former communist friends to the current political and cultural establishment. This myth of modernization. The communists were modernizing the society. They did it through brutal means, through social engineering. And nowadays the liberals are doing this, and they also modernize. They don't use brutal means, but they are They doing it quite, I would say, vehemently, and they're committed to restructure the society, to recycle the society. And then I thought, well, I don't want to be recycled. I thought that I never let the communists recycle me or restructure me. So why should I allow the liberals to do that? So I said no. And then there were many more similarities which I began to notice. And then I wrote this the first in Polish and then in English.
One of the things I wanted to ask about the way you describe one of the commonalities is you talked about how it leads to a strengthening of what is common or base in a man at the expense of what is potentially great and noble, and that both communism and liberal democracy does this. And this is obviously a profoundly a countercultural statement to make amongst the Francis Fukuyama, pro-democracy folks. And even I admit for just a basic conservative, this idea is kind of jarring when you read it for the first time. How would you explain that view?
It derives from equality rather from egalitarianism. I mean, if you are an egalitarian, not only in politics, but generally an egalitarian, if you are anthropologically egalitarian, if you believe that we are equal in everything we do and say, then it's obvious. Then you have to lower the standards. If you introduce equality in education, it's obvious that you have to lower the standards. If you want to have media or art accessible to everyone, you have to make it simpler or more simplistic, and also you cannot condemn the reactions which you find common or vulgar because they are typical of the majority of people. It was perfectly explained in Plato, but in modern age, it was Democracy in America by Alexis Tocqueville. He describes how this vulgarity is a part of democratic life, and how the majority doesn't like the people who are different, and doesn't like anything that makes other people look down at them. So the theorists of democracy were wondering whether it was possible to introduce some kind of aristocratic element, so that there should be respect. Yes, political equality. Yes, equality before the law, but some sense of hierarchy, some sense of proportion, whether it's possible to do it. And then the communists performed a very similar operation. They started with liquidating the hierarchies, not only hereditary aristocracy or gentry, but generally meritocracy. You couldn't really claim to be better in your field if you were a specialist, because it means that you will become a master, and then you will be exploiting those who are not educated as you are. It's a problem with equality. There are many problems with equality, but one of them is that it is such a monster that it is never satiated. I mean, it's never satisfied. one would think that we in an entire human history, and perhaps it is. But then you can see that equality is the value number one. It's a battle cry nowadays. More equality, more equality. Uh, and in order to have more equality, you have to construct a powerful bureaucratic and political machine in order to impose this equality and to crush the opposition and to track down every hierarchy that still exists. And once you find this hierarchy, you have to destroy it or undermine it. You can see that at universities, you can see it everywhere. So yes, I think this is this equality going wild that is behind this triumph of commonality of the vulgar and the common nowadays.
When you say vulgar and common, what would you use something beautiful and transcendent to contrast it with? So when we're talking about people who have grown base and attracted to the vulgar and the common, what are they being drawn away from, in your view?
It's not complicated. I mean, many things. I mean, religion is one thing. I mean, religion that opens you to something larger than yourself and higher than yourself, something infinite, whereas you are finite. So you have to, if you are a religious person in the true sense of the word, if you understand religion, you have to acquire a sense of proportion, but also beauty. Right, beauty is something that in which you see the hierarchy. They are things that are beautiful, things that are beautiful or less beautiful, right? And they are things that are not only vulgar, but they are repulsive. This is interesting. This attack on beauty nowadays, right? The attack the attack on literary or artistic canon. That is, you cannot say that these are the masterpieces because they are not masterpieces. Objectively, there is no objective hierarchy. I mean, that's what the egalitarians say. Also, morality, goodness. We do not use the word goodness or the good, the beautiful and the good. We do not use it anymore. We use the concept of rights. We use rights, but we do not use the category of obligation or duty. There is the well-known French phrase, noblesse oblige. So, right, if you consider yourself noble, right, you aspire to something noble, you have obligations, not rights. So that's what we are beginning to lose, right? We are beginning to lose a sense of nobility, a sense of goodness, of beauty, a sense of the transcendent, a sense of honor. I mean, all these things that make the world plural and diverse. Yes, we are using the word diversity, but in the opposite sense. Diversity in an egalitarian society means that everybody is the same, because what can make you differ is a hierarchy, not equality. Equality makes you similar to your neighbor, to everyone else. So the word diversity today, or the word pluralism, mean the opposite of what they used to mean. Means that it means homogeneity, in fact.
It's interesting. I had Rod Dreher on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the number of Christians who live behind the Iron Curtain who say that materialism has cost them more than communism did. When you look at your own nation, would you say that there are things that Poland lost during democracy that it didn't during communism?
Yes, probably there are some things. It's difficult to find a cause, right, that is directly responsible for certain developments. We are a part of a huge Western world, and there are no borders, no frontiers, and even if there were, nowadays, ideas, types of behavior, they move easily all over the world. So it's difficult to say, to find this cause-effect relation. But I already mentioned that there are fewer people who are interested in serious art or in serious ideas. That was something attractive at that time. Probably one of the reasons was that our access to mass culture was limited, and mass culture is also the effect of democracy, right? It's a democratic phenomenon. Mass society has mass culture. So we have mass culture. We have this dumbing down things going on. Fewer people are interested in serious matters. All the publications that still exist, they are that are devoted to serious matters, have incessant financial problems. They are the readers are fewer and fewer, right? So yes, we lost something. I'm not sure this is materialism, but probably all these factors play a certain role. I have a sense of shallowness that surrounds me, even at the university. University that should be the best place with freedom has lost it too. And seeking more money, they had to give up the high standards and enter the market and education a market commodity with results. Yes, we lost something. I always hesitate with making strong conclusions. That is, I don't know, we could have saved a lot. On the one hand, I think that these developments which we are watching everywhere are so powerful that they are irresistible. On the other hand, I'm a politician, I cannot accept irresistibility of certain processes. A politician is somebody who makes things happen, right? He cannot capitulate. But also, I remember in my young days, I also believed communism to be invincible and irresistible, and it fell after all. So yes, the situation is rather complicated. I think part of the problem is that democracy, liberal democracy in general, has made people devoid of reflection or self-reflection. It's a very thoughtless system. I mean, you take a lot of things for granted. You accept this language. You explain all those cliches. Well, it's democracy. You are free. You have all sorts of rights. You can say and do what you want. You live in a pluralistic society, and people are just overwhelmed by this stupefying rhetoric, and they it never crosses the mind that this rhetoric doesn't correspond to reality anymore. So there is somehow liberal democracy has deprived people of this critical spirit. Also, all the word critique is on the lips of everybody. But then again, people talk about critique as a or criticism. They talk about pluralism, but it used to mean. So this thoughtlessness, this lack of criticism, is partly responsible, and it makes me very irritated. Also at the in the university life and on my books at the university.
So you quoted de Tocqueville on democracy, and it's interesting. In that same book, de Tocqueville said that the reason democracy in America survives is because, quote, the pulpits flame with righteousness, that it was the churches that were the heart of America. And in 21st century democracy, the soul of it, or the hollow space where the soul should be, is secularism. So do you think that your critique applies to all democracy or simply liberal democracy? Could we have democracy undergirded by a framework of meaning and faith, and would that be something tenable and viable in the 21st century?
We can, of course, make a thought experiment. I mean, we can imagine the good society. What would the best system be like? Yes, I think that the democracy, any democracy, is not able to recreate the moral preconditions of its existence. It rather exhausts the conditions and doesn't recreate them. So these conditions have to come from outside. Well, maybe from religion, maybe from national tradition. There must be something. So I think it applies to every democratic system, liberal democracy in particular, because liberalism weakens all these sources of ideas and the spiritual sources that can give energy and vitality to a democratic society. But I made the argument in my book that not a very original argument. I wasn't the first to make it. That the best system we can imagine is a mixed regime, or a mixed system that is democracy, which is combined with some other elements like aristocracy or monarchy. We know that, as a matter of fact, the United States, which is nowadays or has been called for many decades the democracy, was not, in fact, contrived as a democracy, right? It was contrived as a republic, as a kind of mixed regime. But again, when Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States, it was about 50 years after the Declaration of Independence or the American Constitution. Then he never had any doubts that it was a democratic society. But I think until the 20th century, these elements of mixed regime existed in the United States. The Americans didn't have their own aristocracy, but they had kind of equivalent of their own the democracy. If we watch old American movies, you see how the protagonists behave. You can see a Western, right? Sheriffs, cowboys, bar girls in Dodge City, and most of them behave like perfect ladies and gentlemen. So there was this desire, right? Desire to behave differently. I was always struck by this genteel touch in American culture, which I think at a certain moment probably the second half of the 20th century it disappeared. So even if such a democratic society as America, you had this, and I very much regret and deplore the disappearance of thinking along these lines, even in Europe, right, which had a feudal tradition and aristocratic tradition and tradition of hierarchy. It's disappearing now.
This is interesting because for somebody who is a politician to be talking about democracy and all of its ills, what I'm really interested in knowing is when you look at what Viktor Orban is attempting in Hungary, when you look at what Law and Justice is attempting in Poland, and obviously these are very different parties, but to some degree they're both pointing to the same sorts of things, the transcendent things that have been left behind. What do you think the potential is for the party that you represent at the EU, or for Orban's party in Hungary, to try and essentially center democracy in these deeper things, in the first things?
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy in my country because this anti-conservative forces are quite strong, and they are supported by everyone. I mean, you have to be aware that in Europe or in the European Union, but also in Europe as such, Poland and Hungary are the only two countries in which you have conservative governments. Even in the United Kingdom, I mean, you have a conservative government, but is not what it used to be, as we know. It's completely different. I had friends among the British Tories, and they were very frustrated by this change of the ideological profile of the Conservative Party. So you have to be aware that there are two small countries. I mean, one is very small, Hungary, and the other, Poland, is, well, it's not big, okay? And it's Eastern Europe. So it's this inferior part of Europe, in a way. Inferior in the sense we do not have as much power politically as Western Europe. So we are in a very difficult situation, and everybody is against us. Not only the parties, the governments, not only the European institutions, but also the media, culture, and NGOs. I mean, everybody is against us. So it's not easy to survive. Especially that, well, East Europeans have this inferiority complex, that they are these poor cousins, and in a way we are treated like poor cousins. I mean, our West European friends, they say, well, we want to help you. We are your friends. We can give you good advice, and it's it's so condescending. We never say something like this to them. I mean, yes, we are your friends, but they give you a good advice. Do something about this or that, right? So it's only one way. So it's difficult, but well, politics is not easy. So we have to try. I'm hoping that in some not too distant future, you could see a reverse trend in Western Europe. There are some symptoms of it, but the symptoms are too weak. So we have to wait. We have to wait. I mean, nothing in history. Nothing is forever.
That's very interesting because what I wanted to ask you about was when you look at populism taking place right across the Western world, you look at Trump, you look at Brexit, you look at Vox, you look at Law and Justice, you look at Viktor Orban. Now, obviously, all of these contexts are wildly different. They have some commonalities here and there, but you have a lot of people trying to explain away populism by simply looking at various unmet policy needs or various unhad discussions surrounding immigration and things like that. But to what degree do you think that populism is at its root a crisis of meaning in politics that people are sort of responding to?
I don't use the word populism because the word, it has a negative connotation. Man. It's the word that has been used against us as an invective, right? To decrease the importance of the value of we are doing. I think we represent the democratic politics. We were elected. We didn't rig the elections, right? We have wide support. Orban has a wider support in his country. I mean, that's a perfectly democratic procedure. I was before I answer this question, I start with saying that I was very much upset by the results of the elections in the United States because Trump, whatever you think of his policies, he was the politician, and the United States, the Trump administration weakened this political monopoly which we have in the entire Western world, because it's monopoly, ideological, political monopoly of the same parties, the same ideology. They may be called differently, but they are the same mainstream parties. And Trump, from our perspective, was good because, well, even if we weren't close allies, we were probably too small to be important allies to him, but he made this side stronger. I mean, our side stronger. Whereas with Joe Biden, he will close ranks with the European Union, and this hegemony will be even more brutal. So they dictate to us what we have to do. They want to switch off our institutions and impose the political will on us, and they call it democracy. But when we say, look, we will not obey you because we have a democratic mandate from the voters, and they say, no, it's populism. So from top down, right? Once you have the monopoly, is democracy. But when you are legitimized by the results of the election, that's populism. So I think the primary reaction was the rejection of this monopoly. I mean, we didn't want to be dictated to, and we wanted to be independent. I mean, if you engage people in the electoral process and you diagnose a situation and you say this is bad, this should be changed, and you want to do it, right? And the voters have confidence in you and vote for you, and then somebody from outside comes and says, no, you cannot do it, we will not allow you, then you become angry. And a lot of people in Poland became angry. So that was, I think that was the first reaction of what is called populism, but it was anger, not just blind and simple. It was because you are not allowed to manage your own affairs and to improve the situation which you know is bad and needs improvement.
What is your long-term view of how all of this will play out? And I know that you've already said we don't know how history will play out, but would you make a prediction? Do you have a hypothesis about where this is heading?
This meaning what? The entire Western world, or Poland,
Yes.
or Poland and Hungary?
I would say the West, but then also in relation to Poland and Hungary.
Europe doesn't look good. I mean, European Union doesn't look good. They have become more and more arrogant. They overspend. They have become infatuated with silly ideologies. We are living at a time of crisis, economic depression, unemployment, and they are overspending on the Green Deal, which is a costly extravaganza. So I think they are doing everything they can to undermine their own status, which from my perspective or from our perspective is good. But the political catastrophe has also bad side effects. Well, they are in the communist Poland that communism is a system that courageously fights with the difficulties it itself has created. So I think that's exactly what the EU has been doing. I mean, it creates problems and then desperately seeks the solution, and the solutions are make things even worse. The system becomes more and more unworkable and inefficient. I mean, it's too big, and it takes more and more competence. I think we are all more trouble, and the crisis, the next serious crisis of the European Union may be the last crisis. If not, then things will deteriorate. I don't know for how long. Whether we will survive, whether the conservative forces will survive in Europe, well, I already said it's extremely difficult, but we're doing everything we can.
My final question is about Anne Applebaum's book, Twilight of Democracy. Did you have a chance to read that book?
No, not really, but I read reviews. I didn't get hold of it. I know more or less what she writes. I know that she's anti-Orban very much, but she has her own, I think, game to play, and there is a lot about British politics. The title is ridiculous because maybe there is a twilight of democracy, but not in the sense in which she means it. And I do not really respect very much Anne Applebaum when she writes about Poland, and she writes a lot about Poland because she's working for her husband. I mean, she represents her husband's agenda, and her husband is one of the most outspoken anti-law and justice in Poland. So she shouldn't a clear conflict of interest. I mean, she should keep silent. She's personally involved in Polish politics through her husband. So she, whatever she writes about Poland is advancing her husband's agenda, and it is therefore disqualified and worthless.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for taking so much time to talk with us. We really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that was our conversation with Dr. Ryszard Legutko about his book, The Demon in Democracy, and what we see happening both across the West and the East. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to listen to other conversations just like this, please go to the podcast tab at lifesitenews.com. Check out The Van Maren Show. You can listen to podcasts. You can check out past shows. You can subscribe to make sure that you get future shows delivered right to your inbox. You can get us wherever you find your podcasts. Once again, thanks so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next week.